to our MFA in Writing and Publishing Friday night reading series. In this reading series, we're really excited to feature many of our faculty members, our distinguished visiting writers, our staff, and members of the VCFA, MFA in Writing and Publishing community, like alums. So this evening, we have some wonderful guests with us. We have Felicia Rose Chavez, who will be reading with us tonight. Amahl Raphael Khouri, who's a faculty member teaching playwriting in our department, who will be reading with us tonight. Tim Kirkman and Evie Shockley from Rutgers. So we are so excited to have all four of you. I think everyone got my announcement regarding staying on mute. If you're just joining us, please do keep your microphone on mute unless you're speaking. And Xinyi Pai, our assistant director, will be introducing each of our guests and saying a little bit about how you can order their books tonight. Take it away. Thank you.
Our first reader of the night is Felicia Rose Chavez, an award-winning educator with an MFA in creative nonfiction from the University of Iowa. Felicia is the author of the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, How to Decolonize the Creative Classroom, and co-editor of the Breakbeat Poets Volume 4, Latinx, with Willie Perdomo and Jose Olivares. Originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico, she currently serves as Creativity and Innovation Scholar in Residence at Colorado College. And during the program, I'll just be putting people's books in the chats. Welcome, Felicia.
Thank you so much. I am very honored to be a participant in this reading series. Thank you for the invitation to join. I'm really excited. This book came out at the top of January, and I'm just thrilled to be able to read an excerpt from the introduction of the book and an excerpt from the conclusion of the book. With the hope that, you know, I just want to convey that the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop is an invitation to a conversation. It's a memoir. It's a journey. So that we can collectively go beyond this posturing of diversity in our arts programming and in our educational system as a whole, and instead, you know, grab onto specific, tangible, practical strategies that we can all experiment with and tailor to our own communities. So chapter by chapter, step by step, that's my goal with this book. The pedagogy is personal. And as I said, it's my honor to share with you today. So this is from the introduction of the book. In graduate school at the University of Iowa's nonfiction writing program, I was what you might call a difficult student. I own that. Black hoodie, black boots, black coat, slumped in down at the classroom desk, alert and vocal and pissed off, alienated and isolated and deeply lonely and cold. I remember icicles daggering the air, a cold so bad my toilet water froze. How quaint, many said about Iowa City, liberal, walkable, cheap, a real writer's paradise. But I got long stares at the co-op grocery that said, "You don't belong here." I was a brown-skinned Chicana, conspicuous in my white picket rental. And when I'd complain about the Iowans who asked me to see them to a fitting room, to refill their water, to point them to a restroom, "I don't work here," I'd repeat through gritted teeth. My family would tell me to hold my tongue and focus on the writing. I was, after all, lucky to be in the workshop. Thus, the implicit imperative for people of color in MFA programs to write, but not to exercise voice. Silencing writers is central to the traditional writing workshop model. The matrix of silence is so profound. It enlists writers of color to eradicate ourselves. Even now, as I type this, my heart tells me, no, you can't say that. You might derail your teaching career, shrink your literary network, hurt their feelings, sound ungrateful, blow things out of proportion. Even though I am the commander of my own experience, my heart tells me to choose subservience out of fear that my narrative might ricochet off of institutionalized white power and smack me upside the head. That's how racism works, right? It's systematic oppression that breeds behavioral norms. Because when the flowering trees bloomed pink, Iowa City was charming. I had friends, a select few, brilliant women who dragged me on walks when I'd rather brood, who fed me vegetables when I'd rather binge, who discussed global politics when I lacked perspective. I had earnest students who were unafraid of risk, and a champion thesis advisor who reserved me a seat at her family's dinner table. But this book is not about individuals. This book is about institutions, more specifically institutional racism, the system of advantage based on race. When I speak of the traditional writing workshop model, I speak of an institution of dominance and control upheld by primarily white workshop leaders, majority white workshop participants, and canonical white authors memorialized in hefty anthologies, the required texts of study. And when I speak of dominance and control, I'm really talking about silence, not just the traditional workshop ritual of silencing the author when critiquing their work, building tough skin, they call it, to better prepare for the real world, as though writers of color live anywhere else, as though our skin is not leathered to the touch, but a profound, ubiquitous silence, the nearly complete omission of writers of color in person and print. It is as though we do not exist. This was true when I was a financially independent first-generation undergraduate student. This was true when I was a graduate fellowship student, and it's true now that I'm a visiting assistant professor of English at a private liberal arts college. It's like writing programs are encased in shatterproof glass, museum relics safeguarding whiteness as the essence of literary integrity. In 2018, I was one of the only people of color in my English department, and that made me feel physically, emotionally, and intellectually at risk for harm. Compound race and gender with my working class background and presto, instant and incessant anxiety, catapulting me back in time to when I was a graduate student. Anxiety when the editor of the literary journal asks me to step down as a volunteer reader because I expressed concern that her all-white staff might result in aesthetic bias. Anxiety when a white female professor uses a black pen to cross out references to ethnicity in my personal essay, noting in the margins, "You don't need to make it a race thing." Anxiety when a white male professor, former teacher of the year, keeps me after class to discuss my repeated requests for a more inclusive reading list. He sits inappropriately close, sarcastically mocking how unfair it is, how unfair that I'm not represented in the syllabus. He yells so loud a concerned colleague knocks on the classroom door. Anxiety when a white male professor, whom I intend to claim as mentor, begins class with a vote. One of the faculty members, I'll later learn it's the administrative assistant rather than one of the 7 white nonfiction professors, insists that we hire a person of color for the Visiting Writer series. Would you prefer that we bring in a person of color or a quality writer, someone who's doing really exciting things? He suggests that we go around the room, one by one, and voice our vote aloud. I'm the only person of color present, planted at the tail end of the circle, and so I witnessed 12 or so of my white peers, esteemed journalists and rhetoric instructors alike, play into the false binary. No people of color. We want quality writers only. My whole body shakes like I'm cold, but I'm not cold. I'm hot. My face must be so red, I remember thinking. Can't they see my face? But of course, they don't see me. That's the point. When it's my turn to vote, I stand up, shaking, hot, my legs disobedient anchors, and exit the room. I don't say a word. I save it for when the garage door shuts behind me at home. Why didn't you say anything? I sometimes ask myself. To speak up was to enact my powerlessness, isolating me from my classmates who would go on to befriend one another, marry one another, hire one another later in their careers. To speak up was to square off with my professor, the white person in power, the very man who had attracted me to Iowa, whose favor I courted. The implications, the outcomes of moments like these can last a lifetime. Days later, this professor will invite me out for coffee. I'll recount my discomfort in defense of my early exit. I hardly think I said it like that, he'll reply, rolling his eyes. And an instant trifecta of thoughts will dash the line. One, that I'm just another overexcited brown person embarrassing myself with wild stories because, come on, it wasn't that bad. Can't you just let it go? Two, that it always comes down to words for us writers. There's power there, and we know it. And three, that he's just another calculating white person attempting to manipulate my narrative to better reflect on him. One after another, my professors will reach out in an attempt to manage the situation being me, of course, and not insatiable white supremacy. In class, my peers are starry-eyed, but all have X-ray glasses that expose my professor's bias. Whenever we interact, I'll feel anxious and resentful and vulnerable and regretful too that I can't just be cool. I share this story again and again because it marks a turning point in my relationship with the manuscript. 8 years after I lived that experience, at that point, I was like nearly finished writing the book. A former white classmate took to Facebook and she retold this same story. She retold it as a white student sitting in the class looking across the circle at me. She expressed the burning shame she felt and she's carried for years for voting for qualified writers over writers of color. She said it was time to call herself out and it was time to call the professor out. In response to her post, former undergraduate students and graduate students stepped forward and said that this professor had posed the same question to them. This was within the span of a decade. There was something about this moment for me that was so powerful because I had to step back and say, it wasn't an individual exchange. This wasn't something that just happened to me, a misstep, a fumbling. It was a years-long pattern of abusive action that meant to foment racism within our program. And somehow knowing this and making having a big cry over it, it made me feel so much stronger. It made me feel validated, validated my presence in the room, validated my presence on the page. Just yesterday, I spoke with an undergraduate student from the University of Iowa who's a creative writing major. And along with his peers, they petitioned the English department just this past summer, demanding tangible anti-racist action. So the fight still continues within that particular program. And he reached out to me and he asked me for advice. It's okay to be afraid, I told him. I'm afraid too. But if we're going to take action, we have to really be about it because it's essential and urgent. It's not just an experiment in pedagogy, something new to try in the classroom, but it's everything. It's our lives, it's our hearts, it's our past, and it's our future. We have to be about it for real. And I asked him if we could do it together. So I extend the same hand to my readers in a letter to close. Dear reader, a police car parked in front of my house yesterday, blocking the driveway. My 7-year-old son watched from the window. They can't come for us if we didn't do anything wrong, right, Daddy? My husband, a black man, laughed. We needed to go to the grocery store, so my husband took a picture of the police car and posted it on Instagram, then handed me a Post-it note on which he had written the phone number of an older white male colleague. He walked away from me and toward the police officer. My body said, no, don't go. I'll go, please. All that long driveway, my body pulsing with something's wrong. This is wrong. My son chased after him. Wait for me, Daddy. And I stood outside the garage with tears in my eyes, past and present and future blurring into one. And then it was, good morning, sir. And if it's not too much trouble, sir. He was just doing paperwork, my son explained as we backed out of the driveway. But I was silent and my husband was silent. and it was a long time before either of us said anything. What do our bodies do with all we don't say? Does your body suffer too, knowing what it knows? That it's wrong. The everyday shootings, the children caged, the blue lights and brown boys, men dead, the endless assault by white supremacy, power, control, domination. How do we reconcile this knowledge? Do we bow our heads, swallow the scream, get on and off Facebook? Maybe this book can teach us voice, to speak out, to speak back, to say what we know, but don't allow ourselves to feel, because to do so would be equal parts pain and pardon. Maybe this book can teach me courage, because the closer I get to finishing, the more fearful I am of its reception. I was so sure at the beginning that this project was my life's purpose, but now I'm a month away from giving birth to my second son, and I surprise myself by wondering, all that ugliness, is it worth it? Ugliness on death. How do we mourn racism and live racism and fight racism all at once? Maybe this book, in committing words onto the page, is a success in and of itself. Who cares if every time I read the words aloud, I cry? This is my life's work, but it's also my life story. The pedagogy is necessarily personal. I can only hope that someone, somewhere, might read it and attempt a different way, a better way, freeing our bodies to speak more and suffer less. I am so tired, grief-stricken and afraid. Lend me your hope. They say a writer's work must stand alone, that I won't be there when you pick up my book, but maybe I can be if you let me. Maybe we can build this thing together. In solidarity, Felicia. Thank you.
Thank you so much for writing this important book and for sharing your pedagogy with us. Our next reader tonight is Amahl Raphael Khouri, a queer transgender Arab documentary playwright and theater maker living in Berlin. Khouri is the author of several plays, including She, He, Me, Ik Brach Mijn Ruhe, and No Matter Where I Go. Khouri is also a part of the climate change theater action, and their play, Oh, How We Loved Our Tuna, was read internationally as part of the initiative. Please welcome Amahl Khouri.
Thank you. When I was around 9 or 10, I remember one night in our village where we returned every summer. All of us children were asleep early because my Aunt Mariam had finally agreed to let us bake bread with her in the morning, which was a complete unforeseen victory for us, because usually she would give us an immediate, fucking hell, no fucking way. We had to promise to sleep early in order to be awake at 5 a.m. for baking. To this day, the international rule that baking can only happen properly at the crack of dawn is a complete mystery to me. In any case, we were desperate and conceited. All of us children are asleep cocooned on the floor in her hand-sewn mattress and getting devoured by the mosquitoes, dreaming of the prehistoric-looking dough animal sculptures she would fashion and bake for us from leftover dough in the morning. And everyone is asleep except me, because she's going into one of her nighttime reflections, which is unusual for a baking day. She brings up my third cousin, Daniel, a PhD in physics, who immigrated to New Jersey and is married there with kids. Daniel is very well respected in our village. He built his father a new place with extra floors and shops that can be rented out to bring income for the family. Well, my aunt says casually, Daniel used to be a girl. 43 years later, I would call this the greatest foreshadowing of my transgender life. I can't remember how I reacted, but it must have been badly in my shock because she went on and on defending him. No, no, don't say that. He's a learned man. He studied. He's literate. My aunt was illiterate, but she could read plants. I remember once bringing home a box of odd-looking Ekbalium cucumbers I had bought, and with barely even a side glance, my aunt told me exactly the mistake the farmer had made. I talk about her in the past tense because she died and she took her encyclopedic knowledge of plants with her. Each spring, a snow-capped Mount Hermon would appear on the horizon of our ancestral lands in northern Jordan, crisp and close, yet as luminous and resplendent as Fuji. Aunt Mariam would spend an entire winter waiting for the first sign of green to take us children out into the hills to help her pick wild herbs, fill
Amahl, we're having some trouble with your audio. I wonder if you turn off the video, if maybe it would stream a little bit better for us.
patchwork dress with everything from watercolor. Perhaps it was her fina or her patch of Persian time that made me cling to that radio, seeking the written word and the English language with such tenacity. Since her death, her spirit has taken root in mine. Everything I read and think about is plants. With her 2 braids and headscarf tied behind her head in the old way, was sophisticated and full of writing of a second-grade girl pulled out of school to serve the family. Nowadays, I try to piece together her unique recipe for za'atar. I unearthed the film of her at the stove in my mind, hoping the lost frames will somehow appear and with them the final missing ingredient. And they do. Plants listen if you speak. Theater started with us listening to plants, to wine, to a vine. This vine was entwined around the transgender god of theater, Dionysus Bacchus, who demanded inebriation, utter possession, collective devotion from everyone, but also liberation for everyone. The whole land will dance, says Tiresias, the blind prophet. It is by everyone that he wants to have honors and to be magnified while distinguishing no one. According to Artemidorus, a Greek soothsayer, if an enslaved person were to see Dionysus in a dream, it meant they would be freed. It was not uncommon at the rural Dionysia that enslaved people would also be liberated by proclamation on stage. And what of the Maenads, the groups of women whom cis-male historians continuously call mystery cults, women who would live
Hi, everyone. Amahl is joining us from Cairo, from Egypt today, so the internet connection might be a little choppy. If I could just ask for your patience and to keep your audio and video on mute, that would be great. I think Amahl will join us back in a moment.
They're weaving down. Sorry, the internet cut out.
Yeah, Amahl, your audio and video is coming in and out. It might be your internet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
okay,
if you want to, jump off of Zoom and rejoin, you can, or we can go from here.
Is this better?
Yes, that works.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah, that works.
All right. I'm not sure what the last thing you heard was, but I'll try. Okay. Okay. Is it really a total mystery why women in ancient Greece who could not own property of any size, who were never considered full adults by the law but perpetually minors, who always had a male guardian being her father until marriage and then husband if he died, would ever want to leave her house and explore her king? But even in Greece, the good times were brought to an end. Old comedy theater gave way to new comedy. Classic scholar Helen Foley tells us that where the old comedy of Greece deliberately distorted cultural ideals of masculinity and femininity or served to blur cultural boundaries between the genders, the new comedy did the opposite. Old comic costume made its artificiality as costume transparent and permitted the audience to see through it to a greater or lesser degree due to meta-theatrical techniques. It more easily represented gender as socially constructed than the new comedy, whose costumes represented stereotypes and called less attention to the physical body and its appetites. Neither the costumes nor the language of new comedy invited self-consciousness about whether gender is based on nature or constructed by culture that we find at points in old comedy. And here we are, still in the new comedy, circa 2021. As we would say, gritting our teeth in elementary school when mocked by a bully. Ha ha, so funny I forgot to laugh. Rugged individualism and greed are the order of the day. Migrants trying to escape the brutal consequences of colonialism are drowned far away from the prying eyes of the media. A plague ravages the globe. Unbridled, racist, toxic capitalism has pushed people and ecosystems to breaking points, and the destruction of natural habitats has increased potential for even more future diseases to spread from animals to humans and from humans to animals. Millions are out of work. Loved ones are dying alone. The leader of the strongest nation on earth as the pandemic began its rampage was a vulgar narcissist, a perfect bully, the former star of a reality show of the most mediocre kind. And the best that modern medicine had to offer us for much of it was to ask us to wash our hands and wait it out. According to classical historian Richard Seaford, the social disintegration that results from the neglect of the communal cult is often expressed in myth as disease. Dionysus's healing power consists in the social unity achieved in communal ritual and by his status as an outsider. I say now is the moment to look back to the future. In Sophocles' Antigone, Creon, the money-obsessed, total asshole and original bully of the plague-ridden city of Thebes, gets canceled by the chorus. Just like us, with every Black Lives Matter chant, with every teenager coming out story as non-binary, with every pro-refugee demonstration, and anyone declaring Me Too, the chorus in the play calls on Dionysus, the liberator, the god of the vine, to lead the way. The chorus says, the force of disease holds the city fast and all its people. Come, cleanse us, stride over the slopes of Parnassus, or cross the moaning narrows to us. O you that lead the dance of the stars, that breathe out fire, you that watch over the voices sounding in the night. Child of Zeus, his son, show us your presence as a god. O Lord, with your bacchantic nymphs who whirl around you and worship and celebrate you. You in frenzied dance all the night long, Lachos, generous giver. I think I'll stop here because the internet will probably not be good enough to continue. I don't know if that was long enough or if you think I should go on.
I think we can proceed with the next reader, but thank you so much for sharing that piece with us.
Thank you.
Our next reader tonight is writer-director Tim Kirkman, who received an Emmy, Gotham, GLAAD, and Independent Spirit Award nominations for his first feature film, the documentary Dear Jessie, which was named Best Documentary of the Year by the Boston Society of Film Critics. His third feature, Loggerheads, starring Bonnie Hunt, Tess Harper, Chris Sarandon, Michael Kelly, and Kip Pardue, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and won the top prize at Outfest. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you good.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to say I also teach at VCFA. I teach screenwriting and as both short form and memoir, and was part of the founding faculty of this program. And it's really great to see so many familiar names and faces. It's so great to be here, and current students too. I don't have any books. I do have some films. They're all on Amazon. So that's where you can find my work. I also want to say that I'm not a writer of fiction or nonfiction. I am a screenwriter primarily. So it's an honor to be included among these esteemed writers. So thanks for letting me be here and participate in this. This is a short piece that's a memoir piece that emerged when I was thinking about stereotypes. And so it's called, well, it doesn't have a title. So maybe you can come up with a title for me. I'm looking for books about Judy Garland. The librarian, a middle-aged woman in a pantsuit, looked down at me in my thick glasses and brown corduroy shorts. I was 7. "Oh, honey," she said in a sweet Southern accent, "you don't want to read about her. She had such a sad life." She escorted me to the children's books. Unsurprisingly, my interest in Judy started with the 1939 classic, The Wizard of Oz, which I had watched every time it aired on network television. My parents bought me the soundtrack on vinyl, which wasn't just the songs from the movie, but the entire movie, dialogue, sound effects, score. I'd played it so many times, the needle now skipped installed on the scratches. During If I Only Had a Brain, Ray Bolger sang, "I could while away the hours, conferring with the flowers, furring with the flowers, furring with the flowers." Only when I placed a finger on the stylus and pressed down could he go on, consulting with the rain. My favorite moment in The Wizard of Oz is when Dorothy and her dog are rushing to escape the twister. It's a thrilling sequence of destruction and chaos and debris, farm animals and tractors and trees whirling, and finally the farmhouse lifted from the earth, with Dorothy and her dog Toto, inside, up into a funnel cloud. This sequence in the film triggered another obsession, tornadoes. I would read about them and draw them, and even won a first place ribbon in the elementary school art show for my crayon drawing of a tornado destroying a farm. On summer afternoons in our small North Carolina town, I longed for the clouds to start churning overhead and sprout a funnel cloud down to the ground just long enough to witness it, but without actually hurting anyone. I fantasized about traveling to Kansas to see a real storm shelter. Looking back, my obsession with tornadoes is so obvious. They're essentially big phalluses plunging from the sky, not unlike actual ones. They can come out of nowhere and make a big mess of everything. The Union County Public Library in Monroe, North Carolina smelled of old books, bleach, and linoleum tile floors. This is where I learned to use the card catalog and where I committed my first act of rebellion. Undeterred by this concerned librarian, I made my way to the G drawer, Garland, Judy. There were several books. Lucky for me, at 4 feet tall, they were all on the bottom shelf of an adult section. I took a seat on the cold linoleum and cracked them open. The books were filled with photographs of Judy through the years, movie stills, portraits, candid shots I now realize were probably staged for publicity. Concert stills of Judy in a sequined suit on stage at various ages in her life. Little Frances Gum, her real name, singing alongside her sisters. Judy as Dorothy in Oz. Judy as a young romantic lead actress in movies I'd never heard of. Middle-aged Judy looking a lot like my own mother, with her dark hair and tiny frame, microphone in hand, belting out Over the Rainbow for the millionth time. She seemed at that time like the most talented, most beautiful, most interesting human being on the planet. It came as quite a shock to learn that she was dead. According to these books, Judy had died of a drug overdose at the age of 47. Her 5th husband found her collapsed dead on the toilet in their apartment in London. You might be surprised to know that learning this fact made me more, not less, interested in Judy Garland. I became more curious what happened in her life that this could be the result. How could the girl who played Dorothy have ended up dead on a toilet in midlife? Is this the sad piece of the story the librarian was trying to protect me from? Did she think it would hurt me in some way to learn this? On the contrary, learning of Judy's overdose prepared me for the death of my second grade teacher, Mrs. Carlin. Like Judy, she was in her 40s and had recently remarried after a painful divorce. In Judy's case, after 3. Mrs. Carlin had left North Carolina with her new husband and settled in Missouri somewhere. Not long after the wedding, she went missing and was found in a hotel somewhere in Georgia, also an overdose. The details are murky, and it was not something that the people in my small town talked about, and certainly not in front of children. Mrs. Carlin lived on a street in my neighborhood. I could walk to her house in a matter of minutes or cut through the woods. She drove a yellow Volkswagen Beetle, smoked cigarettes, and had a pet rabbit. Asking a librarian for books about Judy Garland surely ranks high on some imaginary scale of sexuality. Asking Santa Claus for the Judy Live at the Palace must as well. How was this possible? It would be years before I learned the significance of Judy Garland as a gay icon, how the Stonewall riots in New York City had taken place in a hot June evening just hours after Judy's funeral, ushering in the modern gay rights movement. These things had happened. I'd never heard about them. And yet here I was at 7 in a one-stoplight town, surrounded by poultry farms and cotton fields and Baptists, as far removed from urban sophistication as a boy could be, connecting instinctively, perhaps, to a voice, performer, a persona who has come to signify for many what it means to be a gay man. I was a cliche, a stereotype, and I didn't even know it. In the past, anti-gay politicians and preachers would poison their followers with talk about gay men and lesbians recruiting children. I hated it. I thought, no one ever recruited me. But now I think I was wrong. I was recruited by Judy. Hers was the voice that said, you're going to feel enormous amounts of isolation and pain. And there are moments in your life when you will want to die, but you don't have to, because somewhere there is a place where there isn't any trouble. Somewhere over a rainbow where happy bluebirds fly, my mother's favorite bird. Far away from people who tell you there are things you should not see, things you should not know about, things you should not touch, feelings you shouldn't feel, but instead a place where your dreams really do come true, a place far away from warnings about people you should not associate with and realizations that they are talking about you. A place where violent storms and overdoses and raids by cops can spark rebellious actions as large as a riot in a bar in Greenwich Village or as small as a library card. That's it. Thank you.
For that personal essay. Is it a personal essay or a reminiscence? Like, how would you describe that?
Memoir.
Memoir. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Our last reader tonight is Evie Shockley, a poet and a scholar. Evie's most recent poetry collections are Me Black and Semi-Automatic. Both won the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and the latter was a finalist for the Pulitzer and LA Times book prizes. Evie has received the Lannan Literary Award for Poetry, the Stephen Henderson Award, the Holmes National Poetry Prize, and fellowships from the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study and Cave Canem. She is professor of English at Rutgers University. Please welcome Evie Shockley.
Thank you, Shinyu, and thank you, Rita, and many thanks to my fellow readers, fellow and sister readers, and to everyone who made time to come out and have some literature tonight. I definitely see some beloved names on screens, and it's a joy. I'm going to read, I think, mostly new work, although I might squeeze in a poem or two from Semi-Automatic. I am feeling like I should take some risks after the wonderful and really moving readings that we've heard tonight. So here are a few poems from a little group of them that I'm writing under the title Soundtracked. And each one is not about, but sort of, you might say, inspired by a song that meant a lot to me at some point in my life. And the poem is sort of using the song to teleport back to a moment. And I realize that not everyone is going to necessarily know all of these songs, but you can do the Spotify thing later. The first one is called Easy by the Commodores. Not like most Sunday mornings of wake up, bangs and hairbrushes, get up, tights and stockings, come on, dresses, lipstick, hurry up, shaving, picking a tie, mama, the thankless engine, we're running late, the get to church on time show. But like those rare winter Sundays, when we woke to ice or snow, fearing frozen pipes, no one in Nashville going anywhere in this weather. My sister and I squeezing into our parents' bed, pink foam curlers still clutching their thrice rolled ringlets, mama's nightgown gauzy yet modest, daddy in his undershirt, one arm crooked across closed eyes, but a half smile saying he's awake under there. The radio on and sweet hour of shared blanket when nobody fussed at nobody. The next one is called Groove Line by Heatwave. The good kids partied at someone's mama's house, parents talking just down the hall while we laughed and hollered up a room full of 13-year-old hormones, an explosion of sweat ignited by a funky electric bass line. Lights were allowed low, but no slow jams, so we were nonstop working, the bus stop, flare legs flapping, denim derrieres doing the bump, jumping into it, till homegirl's mama's candy dish rattled glass on the coffee table pushed into the corner. Everyone in their own groove until certain songs came on and called us into constellation, the freak twine, everybody rocking side, to the front, to the back, fingers and booties popping, cool like it ain't nothing but a thing, or nasty like I got sugar in my bowl, but together, carried on horn riffs and a thumping beat into that sweet repeating moment when we ride the momentum of our hips and the whole room turns. And the last one from this little group is called Good Life by Inner City. And this is house music. Once you get that good life feeling, snaked up Lakeshore Drive or took the L from south of the Loop, hopping lines at Howard, came to campus how it could, the sound of a wall, a pool hall, mixed with synth, sass, bass, and best believe it poured out the DJ speakers into the dorm basement, the student union rec room, and we moved to its promise, a place I know you want to go, beyond reach of tuition bills, financial aid fiascos, impossible pregnancies, incarcerated cousins, lily white liberal arts curriculum, and the exams that flushed us out of tech majors, all the back alley confronting even the front yard kids, putting the next year, the next quarter into question. So tonight, we want to party and noblesse oblige the hosting frat or sorors at the height of heat, forming a ring around the dance floor, throwing their signs and calls into the air like the Southside boys who first made this house, excluded, exclusive, protested, protective, transporting us all together in it if we'd only known it. Let me tell you, no one can take it away. This next poem takes us in a different direction. I wrote this during the previous presidential administration when it felt like a writing life was a catalog of horror. And now I want to read it in the spirit of reminding our new president what tasks lie before him. This poem is called Anti-Immigration. The Black people left and took with them their furious hurricanes and their fire-breathing rap songs, melting the polar ice caps. They left behind the mining jobs, but took that nasty Black lung disease and the insurance regulations that loop around everything concerning health and care, giant holes of text that all the coverage falls through. The brown people left and took with them the pesticides collecting like a sheen on the skins of fruit. They went packing, and packed off with them went all the miserable low-paying gigs, the pre-dawn commutes, the children with expensive special needs, and the hard-up public schools that tried to meet them. The brown people left, railroaded into carting off those tests that keep your average bright young student outside the leagues of ivy-lined classrooms, and also hauled off their concentrated campuses, their great expectations, their invasive technology, and the outrageous pay gap between a company's CEO and its not quite full-time workers. They took their fragile endangered pandas and species extinction and got the hell out of Dodge. The Black people left and took HIV/AIDS, the rest of their plagues, and all that deviant sexuality with them. They took their beat-down matriarchies and endless teen pregnancies too. Those monster-sized extended families, the brown people took those. The brown people boxed up their turbans and suspicious sheet-like coverings, their terrifying gun violence, cluster bombs and drones, and took the whole bloody mess with them. They took war and religious browbeating tucked under their robes. They took theocracy and their cruel, unusual punishments right back where they came from. Finally, the white people left, as serenely unburdened as when they arrived, sailing off from Plymouth Rock with nothing in their hands but a recipe for cranberry sauce, a bit of corn seed, and the dream of a better life. There were only certain kinds of people here after the Exodus, left to wander the underdeveloped wilderness in search of buffalo, tobacco, and potable water, following old migratory patterns that would have been better left alone. I want to read a poem from a portfolio I did a couple of years ago on the issue of mass incarceration. This comes at it from the angle of a family memory, though. It's called Jury Duty, and it has two epigraphs. The first, almost no one ever goes to trial. Nearly all criminal cases, 97%, are resolved through plea bargaining. That's from Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. And the second epigraph, let us go and make our visit, T.S. Eliot. No one wants to be there. Many of us glitter like the sea in sunshine, shedding sweat or tears at the mere thought of a criminal court. Such proximity to police, to cuffs and charges, to be trapped playing a role in some tragedy, condemner uncomfortably close to the condemned. Many others think instantly of opportunity costs. Time is money. Who can afford to spend 3 to 5 days worth listening to lawyers coming and going through the oceans of files, talking of boys who were no angels? No, to serve is a right and our duty, each to each. But the potential juror peers into the courtroom as if it were quarantined for the plague. Once, years ago, my father served in a trial. A stormy evening, the darkness intensified by winds that made our metal screen door buzz like a warped harmonica. As we waited dinner for him, the power failed. My sister and I, young and younger, shrieked till our mom lit the fat candle, its plastic container painted to look like stained glass. As we sat, distracted by flickering scenes of Jesus' miracles, the phone rang. Our father's one call to tell our mother the jury would be sequestered overnight in courthouse cells. "Daddy's in jail," was all we girls took in. Our lives had been a steady caravan of cautions and counsels, inevitably ending in stay out of prison. We hardly dared imagine that anyone once caught behind bars emerged again. The next day brought morning sun and father in the afternoon. We greeted him as if he returned from the dead. Would it be a hardship to serve 3 weeks? Dutiful jurors in my state are asked. The line to plead excuses runs long. Meanwhile, money, or lack thereof, is time for all the men and women awaiting trials in cells they can't bail themselves out of. They hear the prosecutors spooning out their lives, inviting the accused, "Sing to me." They sing, a loud chorus of bodies, white and brown and black, flooding prisons in waves, while we malinger on the beach in our own sequestered chambers. Their human voices wake us, or we drown. I've got 3 more short pieces. I lost my timer, which I had intended to make sure I didn't go over time, but hopefully you all will bear with me. This next poem is also from that portfolio, thinking about, again, mass incarceration. This poem meditates on how technology allows us to make nothing change. It's called Virtually Free. He can do the running, man, but no running. Any dance that shows she knows her place. Coffle shuffle merengue or nene. No iron cuffs to chafe the ankle. Just jewelry that makes a statement, sends a signal. You're at the end of a rope. Oh, rope, you're a rope. See Marissa stop. Stop, Marissa, stop. Marissa stops and shops for food at the corner store. Real groceries are outside her radius. She's got to work within convenience, a perimeter she's made aware of by what she's aware in. Her reality isn't apparent to the unaided eye. Nothing to see here, folks, but surveillance cameras are in place in this place, just in case. Catch Jamal, tech junkie, hardwired to his device, tethered by a 2-hour battery life to the wall of his history class. Jamal got to have that juice. The boy needs an outlet. AJ's shackled to a monthly fee for the privilege of parole. Their freedom isn't free. These are the people in our neighborhood, on lockdown on the block. It's a negated community. Confines virtually invisible, but for the faint red lines. This poem is called Brianna Taylor's Final Rest, or The Furies Are Still Activists. And I think the only thing you need to know that you don't already know, hopefully everyone knows Brianna Taylor's name. The Furies were Greek mythological figures who, whose job it was to exact revenge upon wrongdoers. And I more recently found out that each of the Furies was assigned to a particular kind of wrongdoing, like for special attention. And you'll hear the name at the end of the poem of the person whose special job it was to track down homicides. Brianna Taylor's Final Rest, or The Furies Are Still Activists. Maybe it's your worst nightmare, a thundering knock on the door, or no knock, just the lightning crack of wood giving way against its nature. Maybe you've never dreamed of such force being used against you. In your home, in your bed, you are cocooned, your heart beats slow. The darkness is part of what makes you feel safe. The rest is cotton and flesh, your lovers, and the peace you've earned tracking folks' emergencies back and forth all damn day. You remove your uniform, expect to sleep well. Instead, baby, it's your worst nightmare. The thundering knock of your heart beating slower. Darkness is part of what makes us so furious. The fact that the same bloody forces that blew your life to shreds are still free to deliver their next bouquet of violence. Brianna, rest assured, Tisiphone will help us hunt your justice down. And one last poem to end us in a slightly different space. This poem was inspired both by the end of a semester teaching Black elegies, a semester I knew would be hard because what hasn't been hard for a long time, but got harder as Brianna Taylor and George Floyd and the list of names goes on, as those names began to spill out and as the plague began to take people and disproportionately from the Black community, the Native American community, the Latino community. And teaching a course on Black elegies just got difficult. But I was reading at the same time a wonderful book by Alexis Pauline Gumbs called M Archives, After the End of the World. And that book gave me back some things that I needed. And I thought, well, it's a big book, well worth reading, highly recommended. But I thought I would write a short poem, a sonnet that spoke to some of the same ideas and emotions and hopes. Sonnet for the long second act, after Alexis Pauline Gumbs. Your body is still a miracle. Thirst quenched with water across dry tongue and lips, or cocoa butter, ashy legs immersed till shine seen, sheen, the mind too cups and dips from its favorite rivers, figures and facts, slant stories of orbiting, protests, or protons around daughters and sons. It backs up or opens wide to joy's gush, downpour, the floods, the heart pumps, hip-hop, doo-wop, dub, veins mining the mud for poetry's, oh, cell after cell drinks, ringgold colors, mulled, cool cascades of callow lilies. Swallow and bathe, breathe, believe. Through drought, you survive, like the passage schooled you, till rains arrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that reading, Evie. So we're going to be proceeding here to the Q&A if folks want to put their questions in the chat box or if you want to unmute and ask. But before we dive into that, I thought maybe I would ask Amahl if you wanted to have a moment to just kind of talk to the folks in the room here about your piece. The internet quality was a bit choppy, that it was hard to get the full narrative, and there were just such lovely moments in the opening about, you know, waking to bake with your family and the sort of knowledge of indigenous plants and the daily quotidian. And I think it began to cut out around the time that you were reading about the Greek chorus, but it'd be really lovely to hear you talk a bit about that work and the arc of it. And let's unmute you. Hold on a sec, let's unmute you.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. There you go.
Sorry, you wanted me to talk about the arc of it, you said?
Yes, because it was hard for everybody to catch this. Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. It's I start off remembering a moment when I was 9 or 10, and I was lying on the floor sleeping with my aunt in the village, which is how we used to sleep back then. All of us kids and all the adults would sleep on the floor, and everybody was asleep. And suddenly she began talking to me about a person in our village, actually a third cousin of mine who was transgender, and I had no idea what that was back then. And she was very open-minded about it. And then I go on to talk about her ability to discern all the plants in our land and in our ancestral lands, and to know their functions, and she would take us out to pick them. When spring came, like she would forage, and I wasn't very interested in it because I wanted to use her radio to listen to BBC plays of Shakespeare, which was much cooler to me than picking plants at that time. And I also talked about how, although she was illiterate, and we were always taught that, and I was afraid of her illiteracy, I think and I was saying that I was clinging on to her, to the radio and to BBC and to English, just out of terror of what was, the fate of so many women before me in my family, and what seemed destined to be my own fate, and how her illiteracy was really something that she wasn't illiterate at all. Like, she was very literate when it came to the plants. She could read them all. And so I questioned a bit how this idea that she was stupid because she was illiterate, or that she wasn't, that she didn't know things. In fact, she knew much more, and she was very open-minded about the transgender person in our village, unlike people who have PhDs in my family and who would say the opposite. So it's kind of like a light for me now that she's gone, to have had that acceptance from somebody, and to turn all the notions that I inherited on their head, thanks to her. And then I talk about plants because I'm very into plants right now, and her recipes, trying to how do you say, excavate them in my head because she's not here, trying to remember things that I wasn't interested in as a child, and going to plants and finding a lot of what I did during the pandemic was about finding the relationship between plants and theater, and discovering that Western theater, which started in ancient Greece, um, revolved around the plant ritual and the transgender god, and how that was kept from me as somebody who's trans and who does theater, and the liberatory implications of this ritual, where when they would have the city Dionysia, or the rural Dionysia to be more precise, actually enslaved people would be free. Like, you could go onto the stage and say, I free you, or I free so and so, and women would gather in en masse, and they would literally leave their weaving looms and go and have very kinky orgies together, and what's called the Elysian mysteries, and they would be hallucinating and intoxicated on mystery substances, and how it was a very communal thing where the polis would come together. And so I'm talking too much, but that's and how I think it's very relevant and necessary for us to, in such an ugly moment in history, to look back at those practices, as for me, as somebody who does theater and who feels quite marginalized in theater, to look back and say theater started with us and with plants and with liberation for so many people. So this is a good moment when colonialism has taken us to the brink, and the planet to the brink, for us to look back, and to look back in the future, and to call upon the spirit of Dionysus to to bring us together. So sorry, I was talking a lot. Yeah.
Thank you for the
Thank you, Shinyu.
Our program faculty, Francis Cannon, is actually wondering if you published that piece, if it's in print somewhere that we can read it. We'd love for you to share it. Yeah.
It's been answered,
yeah.
but thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, we discussed, Francis and I had a conversation about it. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading that. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Francis.
So this is a general question for everyone that read tonight from Rita. She's wondering how each of you approach processing social trauma in your work. Evie or Felicia, do you want to take a shot at that?
Social trauma. I mean, I don't think of my work as processing social trauma as much as dissecting the aspects of our social existence that may lead to trauma, or have and do, and to try to peel back enough of the aspects of those things that we are so used to that we don't really see them anymore, to allow us perhaps a different view or angle on what those issues are, and in the service of maybe being able to develop some new ideas about how to address them. I think there is art that is poetry and other forms of art that is really actually sort of reworking trauma, coming at it from that angle. And that is another different and very important function of art, but that just doesn't sort of name what I think I'm doing when I'm making art. So The process, though, it's through language. It's circling and using language to kind of, again, peel back or change perspective in whatever way I can. I think Felicia is going to have a more satisfying answer.
Oh man, I think that I've spent years kind of targeting my focus on processing social trauma. Right, there's so much that when it came to my own work, I knew I didn't want to, as a nonfiction writer, I didn't want to engage memoir. It felt dangerous to me for reasons I enumerate some tonight and within the book. It felt like I needed to distance myself from my own story, and yet I had this impetus for action. And so I invited others' stories, right? So I tried in a graphic essay to engage with military members of color, but specifically queer military members during an era of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, right? And tried to kind of relay narratives in this very experimental graphic essay. I interviewed women who had undergone electroshock therapy and kind of collected their stories in an audio documentary about the overuse of electroshock therapy on female patients within psychiatric hospitals. I processed the mass murder by James Holmes here in Aurora, Colorado, through an experimental kind of approach to Alan Moore's adaptation of the Joker origin story. And so came at that, headline through that and try to process that. But eventually my own stories made their way, right? They made their way up. You can't like settle your memory. I feel like in moments, the spare quiet moments that I had, the stories would surface. And I had to process my own relationship to that. I couldn't continue to platform other people without also engaging in the catharsis myself of what I could offer me in terms of that relief and that voice. And so that was sort of against my will. And those essays came out. And I was just talking about this the other day. Those essays were often written in bed. And it was a time for me to engage the words on the page in this very intimate kind of cocoon setting. And it was safe to kind of just offer that space and time to myself to process. So I think each and every one of us has the impetus. Our memory brings forth these moments that it won't quite let go. And the more we offer that moment on the page, the more we teach ourselves ultimately about what we lived through and who we are and what work we have to do.
Tim or Amahl, would you like to respond to that question?
I was just thinking about what Evie said that was so powerful to me about the importance of language in social trauma, because one of the things that I was thinking about when I was writing this piece was what is shielded from children and how language makes things real, and how it makes things, it makes identities, it shapes identities. Because I grew up in this town where Jesse Helms was from, and those of you who are old enough to remember who that man is, he was the most anti-gay senator in the history of the Senate at that time. He was there from 1972 to the late 90s, and he was the voice, he was the embodiment of anti-gay rhetoric in government, but he was far more than that. I mean, he was anti-immigrant, he used race baiting, he was just the word, he was anti-art. Oh, the arts were the enemy. And so anything that put language to the other, that humanized anyone who was the other, was the enemy to him. So when you grow up around people who tell you don't deserve to be alive, I think you internalize that, especially if you grow up in a place like a Southern Baptist church, or a culture in the South where you just don't talk about certain things. Death being one of those things that I was thinking about when I was writing this piece. Suicide, which was always a shadow over my teenage years growing up there. So, I mean, was the question processing social trauma? I mean, I don't know that I think you just manage it. I don't know. I mean, I have a version of it. We all have everybody in this room has a version of it, of that in our lives, if you've ever been othered in any way. So it's just, yeah, I don't know that I have processed it.
The way that I process it is by doing more and more research, both hands-on and academic, into medicinal and aromatic plants and the rituals and traditions around them, and embracing the liberatory aspects of them that they bring to me, and thinking about pre-colonial practices and the spaces that they offered for people like me, and the healing that they offered, and learning more and more about just how important trans people, especially, were, and queer people were to shamanism and the medicinal and healing roles that they played in those societies. That brings me comfort and healing and liberation. And so instead of making puzzles, I just collect herbs and read about them. And I think the disintegration in real time of science and technology and whatever the Enlightenment supposedly brought us is just bringing me closer to all of that.
Can I add something? It occurs to me that Amahl and Tim and I think all have music in some way, and music and sort of, I think of dance in the same way, or on the same wavelength, especially the kind of like just all out dancing that I'm remembering in a couple of my poems as being on the same spectrum as the Dionysian orgy kind of like frenzies and so forth. Just the role that music plays in offering healing. It's weird that there's a different kind of comfort that you can get from that somatic experience, and that one of the things that poetry can do is call that up. Even when you're not hearing the music, it can put you in that space, and give you that. And so there's that way that art itself is an antidote to some of the kinds of social trauma that we're all writing about. But I think that, you know, Felicia is offering us a different one, and it's also implied in some of the things that all of us wrote, and that is to act, to do something, and to do something collectively and collaboratively, though that's also another form of antidote to what we might call social trauma.
So Felicia, I actually have a question for you. Having read your book, I've been really curious about what kind of reception you've had from the Iowa workshop, whether, you know, the current sort of community, which may have changed quite a bit since you were a student there, or the people who were your colleagues in the program alongside who you studied and you were in classes with. Just curious if there's a dialogue with that community, if they've invited you back, if there are possibilities for transforming that workshop model, and just, you know, how it's been received or not received by that community.
Yeah, I have an event coming up. They did reach out. As a student in the nonfiction program, reading at Prairie Lights bookstore was like, you know, the thing. And both my husband and I mean, he came with me to Iowa. We managed those 3 years there together. We both left coming to peace with the fact that that wasn't going to be a part of our trajectory. I will read at Prairie Lights bookstore in a few days, a couple of weeks, I think. I don't have the date in mind, but I will advertise it. I've been hesitant to, you know. It's hard for me to grapple with the fact that they invited me to read, and they invited me to attend a panel with professors from Iowa who have read the book. And so the panel will be about the book. These aren't professors who taught me. I don't believe they're professors from the nonfiction program. They're just, you know, from various departments on campus. When I spoke about that exchange on social media in which a former student came forward, kind of recalling coincidentally the story that I retell in the book. So many students came forward, and that was a really powerful moment for me because I was so afraid of what they were going to say or think. I was so terrified that I was getting it wrong somehow. I was still doubting myself. Even though the book was almost finished, I was still doubting myself that voice that tells you you're overreacting, like no matter how old you get, it's hard to silence that voice and just trust in yourself. That moment of validation was so powerful because I said, okay, now go forward. Like now go forward with the trust in yourself. I needed it. It was an important turning point, as I said. I don't know if I would have the confidence without that particular moment, without that turning point to agree to an event at Iowa. I spoke with that undergraduate student who, you know, there's a whole collective of them who have been long petitioning for change within the undergraduate program. I spoke with a graduate student, and there's a whole consortium of graduate students who are petitioning for change. Nothing's happened. Nothing's changed. And so a group of students spanning over a decade, students of color, met recently and acknowledged, you know, the existence of the book. And we had a conversation about the fact that there were only 1 or 2 of us per year in this program. We weren't able to activate. We weren't able to validate. And so now we can. Now we can say, you exist and I exist, and what you experienced was real. And so there's power just in that exchange, right? So it's so many levels of undergraduate, graduate, alumni, and now a conversation with professors. I think my hesitancy in publicizing these events comes from a skepticism that this is a first step toward real change. I desperately hope so. I desperately hope in all of these conversations with all of these students that there's an opportunity for reflection, for them to genuinely be heard. But I think there's a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Any questions from the audience, whether from students or faculty? Or if not, do any of the readers have questions for one another? Mikhail?
I just would love to hear sort of what the next creative project is. I just find it inspiring to hear sort of you talk a little bit about what you're excited about working on next, if you have anything on the horizon. For all of you.
Everyone's afraid to go first. So I'll go first.
Thank you, Tim.
We're all looking at each other. I think we're all just sort of like, okay, who's next? Who's gonna say it? I have been asking this question a lot lately because it's so hard to make films without people to help you. It's so hard. So I've been doing a lot of writing, which has been really great. And the one that I'm most excited about is the latest one, which is I've just adapted a wonderful book that my production company got the rights for. It's called Southernmost. It was written by Silas House, who's a fantastic writer who works out of Kentucky. And he has written a book about an evangelical minister who is having a crisis of faith and realizes that everything he thought he believed was wrong. And it destroys his marriage and he loses his job and he kidnaps his kid and heads to Key West. And it's a really interesting, it's a very popular novel and a really simple and beautiful story about forgiveness and love and redemption. And it's, that is what I'm very excited about. So I hope that a year from now, I'll say, I've just spent a lot of time in Key West making a movie. That's what I'm doing. Thanks, Micaiah. It's nice to see you, by the way.
You made it very hard for the rest of us, Tim.
I teed you up to be like a kind of a light popular novel about, forgiveness.
I am happy to go. I don't know what the order is of these things. I am actually working on a critical book right now, not like a particular creative project. Poems are coming when they come, which is more or less how it always works for me. But right now I'm really sinking my teeth into and deeply enjoying sort of like, I say taking apart, which feels violent, but I don't mean it that way. I'm just like diving into other people's poems and trying to articulate ideas that are found within them. And that's a pleasure. And that's what I'm really like deeply involved in right now.
I'll jump in.
Oh, sorry, Felicia, you go first. I was going to ask Evie if there's any particular poets that you're looking at.
Please respond to that. Yeah.
It's a somewhat unconventional book, so it's not like there's a chapter on this person, that in other words, there's a an array of poets I'm looking at, and not just poets. It's kind of going out a little bit into other forms of literature and also visual art. So right now, today I'm writing about Natasha Trethewey. So that's just, you know, who else? Robin Cost Lewis, and like Glenn Ligon, people like that.
I'll just quickly jump in. So, you know, as a result of the anti-racist writing workshop, I'm able to have so many conversations with educators across the country and expanding to, you know, across the globe. And it's really exciting for me. And there's a lot of times where I'm having a conversation with somebody and it's me asking them questions like, really? What do you do? How exactly do you do that? Tell me more about that. And I feel like there's such a great opportunity to develop an easy, quick anthology of just what people are doing across the educational spectrum, but especially within, you know, K through 12. There's so many of those educators who are so hungry for an alternative model and are doing some really innovative and exciting things within their own classrooms. And I think that they need, you know, to put those strategies forth because so many believe that it's impossible to do within a bureaucratic system. And so I just want to lend a platform for those voices. I would love to collect stories on like a digital database. The best comparison that I can come up with is so bad, like Rate My Professor, except that it's an opportunity for those of us in academia to confide our stories and share with one another about our experiences in a particular department, in a particular program, in a particular school, in a particular classroom, whether we be students, staff, or faculty, so that we can help others make informed decisions about their own academic career paths moving forward and find the safest place for them. So that's another project I'm considering. And then a while back, I had one of those like secret society of people that said like, you're doing okay work and maybe we want to give you money. And then later they were like, no, we don't want to give you money. But in the process, you know, they're like, what's your next project? And I was like, you know, knee deep in this manuscript with a baby in my arms. And I was like, I don't have one, but I'll pretend like I do and I'll write you a proposal in a day, right? And I like that proposal. It was about SIDS, and it was about researching sleep arrangements for children, especially the history of the cradle is fascinating in all its variations and its kind of political manipulation. But the crux of it is that you know, pregnant women and women who have recently given birth are not trusted with their own innate knowledge to care for their children, especially, you know, focusing on this experience of touch during quarantine and COVID and co-sleeping with my child and the extreme pushback and judgment that I experienced as a result of that. And so that was kind of the idea there.
I want to know who.
Yeah, I'm working on a text about the intersection between plants and colonialism, which I hope to create an illustrated book about. And I'm also working on a one-person play based on the ideas that I mentioned today. It's about queer and trans people and plants and theater and plague and how they have this, there's a relationship there. So those are the things that I'm working on. As well as doing, I do plant research on the side. and I'm doing that right now in Cairo. I'm researching the herbalists and the tradition of herbalism and what's happened to it, and what's happening to it.
This might have gotten answered in private messaging, but I think people are wondering about who painted the painting in your background, Felicia. Are you a painter too?
My mom. So my mom, she has only lived with us for a couple of years, and she was in a really, she's in a really bad spot. And I was kind of funneling my entire savings account into like medical bills and paying her rent and debt. And it was such a destructive lifestyle that so many people in my family take on. Like, we will work ourselves to the ground. And, you know, and I just wanted this, I had this vision for her. Like, I just wanted to see what she was outside of this identity of work. She had held the same job for like so many years, and just kind of adopted unhappiness as the lifestyle. And so my husband and I invited her into our home. And at first she started walking, and then she started running, and then she started painting. And it's only been a year that she's painted. I've bought like everything. I haven't trying to make her a website right now, but I keep buying the paintings from her because my whole house has paintings. They're fabulous. So I need to stop buying her inventory and start helping her promote. And I think that will be my next, I'll include my website and hers once it's created, so that we can all support her in that amazing talent, secret talent at 62. So yeah.
Your next project can be curating and writing her catalog.
Yay! I love it.
So last call for questions. If anybody
I have a question for Evie. What's your next song poem? Because those are great song tracks, by the way. Just shout out. Clearly, we're contemporaries, at least a little bit somehow. Those are awesome songs. I wanted to sing them.
Yes, I should probably do it. Just, you know, like flaunt my bad voice and get people
Seriously.
in the mood.
That was awesome.
I have a couple of artists on deck that I want to, to pull from, but I haven't decided specifically on the song, but I think the next group is going to be Cameo.
Oh, that's awesome.
So stay tuned.
Well, Rita, any closing words?
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It was phenomenal. Thank you so much, Felicia. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Amahl. Thank you, Evie. It's been an honor to have all of you read with us tonight. Thank you for answering our questions and spending this time with our community. It's been really lovely. Please come back and join us in some iteration of the MFA in Writing and Publishing program. And I just wanted to make a couple announcements. We're going to be having our next Friday night reading series on Friday, February 19th. And in that reading, we'll be having our Assistant Director, Shinyi Pai read. We'll have Pragrita Sharma read, Lizzie Fox, and Tim Horvath, who's one of our faculty members, will be reading as well. So please stop by. It'll also be on Zoom, 5:30 on Friday, February 19th. So please do come to that 2 weeks from now. And in the meantime, I just wanted to say thank you once again to all of our guests. Thank you to the folks in the audience who came, our students, our alums, our staff and faculty. It's been a pleasure having you here. And if any of the writers who visited tonight would like, our students, if they could follow up and ask you any questions, I'd be happy to share out your email as well. So let me know about that. And otherwise, have a lovely weekend, and thank you so much. And please unmute so we can clap our readers tonight.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey.